The city was silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a republic on life support. 2,000 years ago, Rome stood at a crossroads, divided, distrustful, and tired of the very system that built its greatness. Modern audiences may sense uneasy echoes of this in their own time. The Senate argued, the people rioted, and veterans begged for land while the wealthy hid behind their walls. And then a single man appeared. He promised to heal the chaos, to give hope without ever wearing a crown. His name was Julius Caesar. He didn't just command legions, he commanded a story. He turned mercy into a weapon and loyalty into theater. By the time the knives found him on the Ides of March, it was already too late, because you can kill a man, but you can't kill the myth he teaches a nation to believe. And in every age, including our own, that story whispers the same warning. A republic survives on trust. Once the people trade that trust for the promise of one man, history has already chosen its next chapter. Rome in the 1st century BCE was a city of fractures and fatigue. The marble streets were still lined with trophies from its victories, columns, arches, and temples. But the heartbeat of the republic faltered. Civil wars had shattered the old order. Marius and Sulla had bathed the city in blood, teaching Romans that power no longer lived only in the Senate, it lived in legions. Sulla's prescriptions had left an indelible stain. The sight of lists nailed to the rostra, the names of men condemned to die, and the echo of footsteps running through alleys as families fled the executioners. Economically, the republic was strangling itself. Veterans roamed homeless through the streets, demanding land and pensions. Debt crushed the urban poor, while the elite enriched themselves through provincial plunder. The grain supply faltered, and bread riots threatened to ignite. Rome had conquered the Mediterranean, but at home the people whispered that the republic was dying, eaten alive by greed, factions, and memory of its own violence. It was into this chaos that Julius Caesar stepped not as a king, but as a narrative. A lesser-known detail of his early career reveals how much he understood the currency of perception. In 65 BCE, as aedile, he bankrupted himself to stage lavish games. He filled the forum with gladiators, processions, and exotic displays, even secretly commissioning more fighters than the law allowed. He borrowed enormous sums from Crassus, Rome's richest man, to fund these spectacles. Why? Because Caesar knew that power began not in law, but in memory. If Rome remembered his generosity, the debt would one day pay itself back in votes, loyalty, and fear. He also understood lineage as theater. During his public funeral for his Aunt Julia, he displayed images of Marius, his uncle by marriage, and a figure beloved by the populace but despised by the Senate. It was a calculated risk, aligning himself with the people's memory of defiance while silently taunting the optimates. The message was subtle but clear. I am both heir to the past and the future Rome needs. Historians debate whether this ambition was opportunistic or visionary. Some see a man exploiting the republic's decay for his personal rise. Others argue he was a product of inevitability, a leader forged by a system that could no longer sustain itself. Cicero, watching Caesar's ascent, described him as a man who can charm the people and terrify the Senate in the same breath. Modern viewers may recognize the pattern. When institutions lose the trust of the masses, the public ceases to believe in process and begins to believe in people. One man emerges as both a promise and a threat. One man becomes the story. By the time Caesar formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus in 60 BCE, he had already built his foundation not in marble, but in memory. The Senate still pretended to control Rome, but in the streets, the whispers had already chosen their savior. It began with a pardon, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE and declared, Alea iacta, as the die is cast, Rome braced for the familiar pattern of civil war. Romans remembered Sulla, whose victory had soaked the city in executions and property seizures. Heads on spikes had once lined the forum, and death lists had fluttered in the wind on the rostra. But Caesar chose a different stage for his rise. He chose mercy, he spared his enemies. Senators who had voted to strip him of command were allowed to return to their seats. Pompeians captured in battle were released. Brutus and Cassius men who had openly opposed him were pardoned and publicly welcomed back. Even Cicero, though not directly in Caesar's army of enemies, was treated with notable leniency. Each act of clemency was more than a gesture. It was theater, a calculated display that branded Caesar as the man who would break Rome's cycle of blood. Rome had never seen mercy like this from a victor. The city that expected terror received a performance of benevolence. Citizens whispered that the gods had sent a savior, not another butcher. Lesser known is how Caesar paired his clemency with acts of practical generosity to build a narrative of redemption. In 49 BCE, he passed moderate debt relief, not the radical cancellation that populist tribunes once demanded, but enough to ease the suffering of the urban poor while protecting the credit of Rome's elites. By forgiving interest accumulated during the Civil War, he signaled that he could restore order without igniting class war. He understood that Rome's loyalty was not won in the Curia, it was won in the streets. He distributed land to veterans, ensuring that the men who followed him across Gaul and Spain would carry his name in their hearts. He staged massive feasts and public games, funded from the spoils of war, turning every festival into a campaign rally. Seating was choreographed carefully veterans, and the poor closest to him, their cheers echoing into the marble halls where senators squirmed in silence. Caesar was rewriting the language of power. Rome would remember him not for the blood he shed, but for the blood he chose not to spill. Historians debate the sincerity of this mercy. Suetonius claimed that Caesar's clemency was reckless, giving his enemies the opportunity to strike back. Plutarch suggested that mercy was his greatest weapon, making men live under the weight of a debt they could never repay. Modern scholars see the strategy clearly. By sparing lives, Caesar conquered Rome twice, once with legions and once with narrative. Modern viewers might recognize the pattern. A leader who stages compassion as a performance, broadcasting forgiveness as proof of moral superiority, can disarm rivals more effectively than violence. Caesar was building not just authority, but a brand. By the end of his first year as dictator, Rome had begun to kneel not under the fear of the sword, but under the weight of gratitude and spectacle. The Republic still existed in name, but its heart had already surrendered to the man who made mercy look like destiny. On Caesar's statue, someone scrawled one word, Rex. The letters were small, scratched in haste, but they rang through Rome louder than any trumpet. King, the title Rome had sworn to destroy. The Republic was born in hatred of kings. The legend of Tarquin the Proud still haunted the city like a ghost. Yet in 44 BCE, the fear of monarchy had returned, etched not in decrees, but in whispers and graffiti. Caesar had not called himself king. He didn't have to. He understood that power lived as much in symbols as in swords. He turned imagery into a weapon, crafting a living myth. Coins now bore his face, the first time a living Roman had displaced the gods on currency. A denarius with Caesar's profile traveled farther than any speech through markets, taverns, and soldiers' hands. Every transaction carried a message. Rome is Caesar, and Caesar is Rome. Statues of Caesar appeared in temples and public squares, draped in laurel. Some were placed among the likenesses of Rome's ancient kings, a visual argument that history itself had chosen him. Titles accumulated. Father of the fatherland, dictator, perpetuo dictator for life. These honors, offered in pieces, became a mosaic of monarchy without the crown. Lesser known is how carefully Caesar orchestrated his triumphs to burn his image into Rome's memory. In 46 BCE, he celebrated 4 separate triumphs in one year: Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. Gaul displayed his greatest conquest: warriors in chains, the spoils of 8 years of war, and painted maps of rivers and forests most Romans had never seen. Egypt paraded Cleopatra's young brother, the captive King Ptolemy XIV, a living symbol of Caesar's reach into the east. Pontus celebrated his swift victory over Pharnaces II with a 3-word brand that would outlive him: Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Africa flaunted exotic animals, golden treasures, and bound Numidian princes, reinforcing that Rome's savior had extended its shadow across continents. These weren't mere processions, they were episodes of living theater, teaching the crowd to link Caesar with destiny. And yet the dance between humility and ambition was razor thin. At the Lupercalia festival in February 44 BCE, Mark Antony approached Caesar before the roaring crowd with a diadem, a king's crown. The first time Caesar waved it away, the crowd roared approval. The second time he refused again, and the cheering grew deafening. To the people it was humility, to the Senate it was a performance. Caesar had proven he could be king if he wished, while branding himself as the reluctant savior Rome could not live without. Historians still debate his true intent. Was he sincerely rejecting monarchy to preserve the illusion of the republic? Or was he letting the people crown him in their hearts before he touched the diadem? Modern observers may see a familiar political playbook, the power of appearing reluctant while orchestrating every moment, turning denial into desire. By the time Rex appeared on his statue, the question was no longer whether Caesar was a king. It was whether the republic still existed, or whether its marble columns now held up the stage of a one-man empire. The Senate applauded him in daylight and plotted in candlelight. By early 44 BCE, Caesar's shadow stretched across every marble hall of Rome. He was dictator perpetuo dictator in perpetuity, his statue gleaming beside the kings Rome had once sworn to banish. His gilded chair in the Curia glittered like a silent crown. To the people, he was the man who brought bread, games, and peace after decades of chaos. To the Senate, he was a warning carved into living flesh. The Republic existed now only in name. Allies turned to conspirators. Gaius Cassius Longinus, spared by Caesar's clemency, fumed in secret. Marcus Junius Brutus, treated like a son, wrestled with a paradox. Could loyalty to Caesar coexist with loyalty to the Republic? Men who dined at Caesar's table and cheered in the forum at his festivals would meet under the flicker of lamplight to whisper his death. Lesser known is how intimate the plotting became. In the weeks before the Ides of March, conspirators attended Caesar's dinners, touched his hands and praised his generosity. Some even walked beside him through the forum, rehearsing in their minds the angle of the blade they would soon draw. Publicly, they were loyalists. Privately, they were choreographing the Republic's last gamble. Debate still shadows these days of conspiracy. Did Caesar sense the danger? Suetonius paints him as arrogant, dismissing omens and warnings. Plutarch suggests fatalism. Caesar knew the risk, but the man who had bent history would not bend to fear. Modern scholars divide between a Caesar blinded by hubris and one who embraced his myth so fully that he could not imagine dying as an ordinary man. In the weeks before the Ides, omens rippled through Rome. A horse refused to eat near the Temple of Mars. A flock of birds tore each other apart above the Tiber. Soothsayers warned him in the streets, their voices drowned by the cheers of the crowd. Still, he pressed forward. He spoke of the Parthian campaign that would take him east, to avenge Crassus and extend Rome's borders. Perhaps he believed leaving Rome would cool senatorial resentment. Perhaps he believed that a man who had become a myth could not be touched by knives. Modern viewers may find this moment hauntingly familiar. When a single figure embodies the state, resistance rarely rises in open battle. It festers in private, waiting for the hour when spectacle yields to steel. By the eve of the Ides of March, 60 men had sworn to strike. The forum roared with public applause, but the Curia whispered in lamplight. The marble of the Republic was ready to crack. They killed the man, but they couldn't kill what he had already become. The morning of the Ides of March, 44 BCE, rose under a gray sky. In Caesar's home on the Via Sacra, the air felt heavy with omens. His wife Calpurnia clung to him, shaken by dreams of his statue bleeding and the roof collapsing. A soothsayer had already warned him in the street, beware the Ides of March. But Caesar went. Whether out of defiance, habit, or belief in his own invincibility, he left for the theater of Pompey, where the Senate now met. He had walked this path before as a man who owned the city's memory, the conqueror of Gaul, the savior of the poor, the pardoner of enemies. He had turned mercy into theater and spectacle into policy. His life had been a performance. This morning would be the final act. Inside the Curia of Pompeii, the conspirators waited. They surrounded him like friends, smiling, greeting him warmly, pressing close in a show of deference. Then, as Julius Caesar reached for Caesar's toga, the signal was given. The knives flashed. Casca struck first, clumsy and nervous. Steel scraped across bone. Caesar turned in shock. More blades followed, 23 in all, a storm of betrayal in intimate silence. Marcus Junius Brutus, the man Caesar had trusted and spared, struck among them. Ancient writers disagree on his final words, but Plutarch records the gesture. When Caesar saw Brutus, he pulled his toga over his head and sank to the marble floor. Ancient sources suggest he fell near the base of Pompey's statue, a symbolic image, as if the old orders of Rome had taken its revenge. The conspirators thought they were saving the Republic. Instead, they birthed a legend. The city did not erupt in gratitude. It froze in horror. The people mourned, then raged. Caesar's body, carried to the Forum, became the centerpiece of Mark Antony's funeral theater. A wax effigy rotated above the crowd, displaying each wound. Antony lifted the bloodied toga, naming each cut like an accusation. The crowd howled, and veterans who had followed Caesar across the world roamed the streets in fury. Lesser known is how the funeral pyre rose from the Forum itself, built from benches, carts, and whatever citizens could rip from the streets. Flames consumed the body of the man they had called a savior, and the smoke carried his myth into the sky. Historians still debate the meaning of that day. Was Caesar a tyrant undone by ambition? A visionary who outgrew a dying system? Or simply the inevitable product of a republic that had long since hollowed itself out? Whatever the answer, the marketing of his power outlived him. His face remained on coins, passed hand to hand like a relic. His name became a title: Caesar, then Kaiser, then Tsar. His heir, Octavian, would complete what the knives had failed to undo, transforming his myth into an empire. Modern observers may recognize the rhythm. When a nation invests its survival in one man, his fall does not end his story, it begins it. Caesar died without a crown, but in death he became immortal. They called him savior, others called him king, and some simply feared how much of themselves they saw in him. Rome's streets wept, but the Republic was already gone. The knives of the Ides of March carved a body, not a cure. The men who thought they were saving liberty only lit the path to empire. Power doesn't die, it molts. It trades togas for crowns, memories for monuments, and men for myths. 2,000 years later, the pattern survives. A nation falters, a figure rises. He promises salvation without a crown. And the people cheer until the next mask falls. So now we ask you, was it patriotism that bled on the Ides of March, or just another republic surrendering to the oldest story in history?